do this, people straggle in for the last 10 minutes or so. So people will probably be coming in while we get started. And again, thanks Dan for welcoming everybody. This is, as he said, this is our third presentation about the use of monkeys on the UW campus. The name is Primate Vivisection, A to Z, so we talk about things besides, when we talk about everything, anything to do with the use of monkeys on campus is our topic for discussion. Tonight, I'm going to start out by doing three things. I'm going to talk to you generally about a little bit about who monkeys are, about what goes on in their minds as far as we know, about their behavior a little bit. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the industry, the use of monkeys in the United States, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the oversight here on campus regarding the use of monkeys and animals generally, actually. I guess because this is, some of you haven't been here before, I'll do a little bit of an update. What we've started doing is we went through the people using monkeys on campus essentially alphabetically. We started with David Abbott, then we talked about Michelle Basso, Banka, Bird, and tonight we're going to talk about Christopher Coe. We'll miss some people on the way, some of the minor players. We'll try to talk about most of the major players on campus. Whenever you talk, the issue about animal research comes up and you're talking about somebody who feels fairly knowledgeable, they're going to basically make two arguments to defend what goes on. They're going to say first that we're finding many cures for human diseases and that the research, all of the research is very carefully monitored. There's rigorous controls in place. And so we're going to talk about some of those controls tonight. In the process of talking about just the A through B essentially of what's going on, our first presentation, Michelle Basso showed up. She's one of the first people we spoke about and whose research we looked at. And she does apparently research having something to do with Parkinson's disease on campus. And after we talked about her research, she stood up and she made a claim about the fact that L-DOPA had come from, L-DOPA is a common drug that's used to treat Parkinson's disease, and she made the claim that L-DOPA had come from primate experimentation. So I sort of scratched my head at that, and I went back and did some research, and I found out that in fact, apparently the most widely known thing in neuroscience is the fact that a man named Orny-Kaiwitz, who almost received the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the use of L-DOPA, based his study on cadavers. And then when we were studying, we talked about Abbott, we discovered that the university had claimed that they had discovered the causes of a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS, in women. And doing a little bit of research on that, the National Institutes of Health says is that the causes are still unknown. Everything that, apparently, the claims that the university makes, if we do a little bit of research, it's not too hard to sort of debunk those claims or find out that maybe they're not. You would think that somebody, a university professor studying Parkinson's disease, would be an expert on the history of Parkinson's research. Michelle Basso wasn't. Anyway, so that's just to sort of bring you up to date. Oh, one other thing I forgot. In our fact checking time before last, the new primate vet came up and was talking to me, and and we got into a discussion, and he made the claim to me that he felt like his job was important because he knew that he was taking care of the animals in the lab and alleviating as much suffering as he could every day and doing as good a job as he could. And I just recently read a book written by the head veterinarian at University of California, San Francisco, called What Do Animals Want? So both of these people were lab animal vets, both making essentially the same claim that the vet on the ground in the labs is the person that makes sure that everything is actually done fairly humanely. So I got to wondering about his claims. His buddy Capuano, who's here with us tonight, I started wondering about his claims, and so I went and read some of the newsletters put out by the Primate Center. And so they were really pushing Buddy's experience and talking about how lucky they were to have him come. And so when I was reading his publication list, it looks like he's been involved in his previous school in a lot of studies. He himself was a vivisector, involved in giving monkeys a disease called simian immunovirus, and then taking records as they got sick and on their way to death. It bothered me that someone who says that they're glad to be in their role of protecting the animals and taking care of them and assuring the humane use of animals was somebody that prior to coming here had been involved in killing them. It bothered me a lot. But every time that I hear people talk about the humane work they do, the life-saving things that they're doing, if I do a little bit of research on it, they never are telling me the whole story when they talk about it. But anyway, let me tell you a little bit about monkeys. You know, one of the people that started the primate experimentation in the United States was Harry Harlow. And Harlow, early on, just made the claims that monkeys develop, well, let me read you a quote. This is from one of his students named John Gluck, and it says, Harlow's work on the process by which monkeys learn to solve discrimination problems began to attract attention. Now, this was in the late 40s and early 50s. He proposed that monkeys solve discrimination problems by developing hypotheses about the situation. According to this view, the process of learning proceeded as incorrect hypotheses steadily were eliminated in favor of the correct approach. These hypotheses could then be applied to similar problems encountered in the future. In his own words, the monkeys learned how to learn. This proposal explicitly rejected mechanistic explanations of learning then favored by behaviorists. Harlow described monkeys as having complex cognitive abilities that involve the existence of intentions, curiosity, and solution plans. That was some time ago. That was decades ago. In 2002, researchers at the Washington Primate Center made this comment. They said that the behavioral repertoire of non-human primates is highly evolved and includes advanced problem-solving capabilities, complex social relationships, and sensory acuity equal to or superior to humans. Non-human primates are capable of advanced behaviors that share important and fundamental parallels with humans. These parallels include highly developed cognitive abilities and binding social relationships. The behavioral repertoire of these animals makes them valuable models for research on the functional effects of exposure to neurotoxic agents. What we find is if you watch the media about this stuff and you look at the papers that are being published on PubMed, the National Institutes of Health's website that catalogs all the scientific papers that are published in the United States, around the world to some degree, it's impossible not to see the continuing data that's being built up, talking about the cognition of monkeys, talking about the fact that they're able to do simple mathematical sorts of things, add and subtract, that they have intention, that they are aware of their thoughts to some degree, that they're more like us than anybody had ever thought possible that a non-human would be capable of doing. There was a study done in the early 60s. I've talked about this, and I talked about it almost every time, Masterman, Terrace, and Weckland. What they did was they trained monkeys to pull a particular chain to receive a color chain in a particular order to receive a food reward. Once they did that, the monkey, of course, doing this is strapped into a chair. And once they did that, they put another chair on the other side of a one-way mirror and strapped another monkey into that chair. Now, every time the monkey pulled the right change in order to get the food reward, the monkey that he could see through the window received an electric shock. And if the monkey had been in the chair and received the shock, and then he was the person that was deciding whether to get fed, he would often refuse to pull the chains and shock the other monkey. In one case, one of the monkeys went without food for 12 days rather than shock a monkey in the other chair. Back in those days, they were chairing monkeys for long periods of time. In some cases, they were chairing monkeys for weeks, if not months on end, until they died. Here at the University of Wisconsin, not too long ago, they were chairing monkeys for at least 3 days at a time. We'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about 2.5 years ago, I was at a chimpanzee sanctuary in Cameroon. A friend of mine started taking baby monkeys, baby chimpanzees, whose mothers had been killed in the bushmeat trade, and then trying to give them some semblance of a life, building social groups with them. And so I got to be there for a while and take care of some of those young chimpanzees. While I was there was a young Gwynedd, and whose mother had been eaten, had been in the stew pot. And my friend, who's a veterinarian, was basically took the baby monkey out of the village, confiscated the monkey. It's illegal in Cameroon to kill monkeys, but they do all the time. And so we had that monkey, and there was nobody to take care of it. And so basically I started sleeping. This is a very young monkey. He started sleeping with me. He started hanging out with me during the day. We'd go for walks. He'd hang on me, and we'd go out, and I'd sit down someplace in the forest, sit down on a little log or something and read, and off he'd go into the trees. I kept hoping that other monkeys would come along and he'd run off with them, but no such luck. But I'd read, and out of the blue, all of a sudden, boom, he'd be jumping out of the trees and landing on me, and I'd get ready to go back, and I'd just pick up my stuff and say, let's go, and someplace up in the trees, here he'd come just scrambling down and jump on me. So, I don't know what that has to do, but with anything except it tells you a little bit of an idea that at least I had some personal experience. Sitting in the jungle watching the wild monkeys up in the tops of the trees, on this one occasion, I was watching this monkey. He was in this tree. I don't know how high it was. If I said how high I thought it was, you'd think I was lying. But he was way, way up in the air. And he's up in the top, and he looks out. It's the highest tree around. And he's looking all around, and off he just jumps, just leaps out into space, just on faith that he's, I guess, going to grab a branch when he goes down. It was so amazing. It was like he's flying through the air. But watching him do that, it really made me understand how free he was as they're running across the street tops. And yet here at the university, we're keeping them in these stainless steel boxes for decades on end. In some cases, some of the monkeys here are up to like 30 years old. So that's a little bit about monkeys. Around the United States, there's about, we don't know the exact number because the numbers are very hard to get. We know that there's between 50 and 100,000 monkeys used in the United States every year. We know that the University of Wisconsin is one of 8 facilities called the National Primate Research Center System. That research center system has on hand about 20,000 monkeys. There's another 20,000 monkeys that are imported annually for use in toxicity studies. The monkeys that are imported don't live very long. They're all going to be fed enough poisons, or they're going to be getting drugs and killed and looked at. That's an annual importation for places like Covance. Nationwide, though, we think there's between 50 and 100,000 monkeys. This is the best estimate. Some of those numbers come directly from the USDA, but nobody really knows. The USDA's figures are just horribly messy. The monkeys around the United States are used in every different kind of thing that you can imagine. They're used in behavioral studies. They're used in toxicity studies. They give them, they test marijuana on them. They test cocaine on them. They do everything. Here at the university, they do all sorts of things as well. Maybe you guys saw this article. Let me talk about oversight a little bit. Maybe you saw this. UW monkey deaths raise questions. Maybe you saw that. There was a number of articles that came out about this. This was about a researcher, a senior researcher here at the university named A. Terasawa. She's been at the university for some time. She's been at the university for, I don't know, 18, 19 years or something. She's been doing the research that she's doing here. She's been doing it for about 17 years. What happened was, the USDA, let me read you this. Let me read you, since we're doing oversight, let me read you what the university says. The university, this is on their website. Center research projects are reviewed at many regulatory levels to ensure conformity with the Animal Welfare Act. The USDA Guide for the Humane Care and Use of Laboratory Animals and NIH research protocols. The graduate school, including the Primate Center, is fully accredited by the American Association for the Accreditation of Laboratory Animal Care. In April of this year, there was a quote in the paper from an unnamed UW researcher, this is the Wisconsin State Journal, who says, once a study begins, care is provided every day to animals by specially trained scientists, veterinarians, technicians, and animal caretakers who assume stewardship of the animals under their care. Well, supposedly, the way this works, according to the Animal Welfare Act and around the United States, everybody that uses one of the species that's covered under the Animal Welfare Act has to have a committee, and that committee is supposed to look at the protocols that are going to be performed on campus using animals, and they have to approve those protocols in order for those to go forward. They're supposed to make semi-annual, every 6 months, they're supposed to do tours of the university, the labs, make sure everything is in compliance with the Act. They're supposed to review the protocols periodically as they maybe annually. If you ask the people who work at the university, they'll tell you that the research is very carefully monitored. Now, what happened with Dr. Terasawa's study? Now, she'd been doing this for 17 years, remember. A USDA inspector came to campus, there were 2 of them, to do their annual inspection. And they discovered that one of Dr. Terasawa's monkeys was a monkey that was just quite old. She was, according to Terasawa, she was equivalent of a 90-something-year-old woman, had been strapped into a chair. She had a tube in her brain that had actually 2 tubes in it. They were doing a thing called a push-pull perfusion. They were forcing chemicals into an area of her brain and then with another pump sucking it out. And she would stay in this chair for 5-6 hours on end as they did this push-pull perfusion. Looking at her research again, trying to make it pass muster, the IACUC wanted to call it a microdialysis. It is a microdialysis if you look at some of the other studies that are similar to these. Anyway, the USDA discovered this, not the internal animal care and use committee. The questions that the monkey deaths raised apparently weren't really answered. The question is, well, let me tell you what the chair of the IACUC committee, there's 2 committees that oversee research at the Primate Center. One is often the all-campus committee, if in very serious research where they want another body to do oversight of the research. And then there's the graduate school IACUC. The graduate school is the school that oversees the research at the Primate Center. So, lost my train of thought. They had approved the research, and when it was discovered, the chair, Eric Sangren, made the claim that the fact that it was discovered was proof that the system works. It was proof that the system works. Now, the research had been going on for 17 years. Somebody from the outside came in and discovered that, I didn't tell you how she died. She was in the chair. They're doing this push-pull perfusion on her, and the technician who was supposed to be in charge of her, whenever a monkey's chaired, you're supposed to be around-the-clock monitoring of the monkey. That person took a lunch break, and they left. They were gone for like a half an hour. While they were gone, the monkey died. And the USDA found out about this. Now, the internal IACUC committee didn't find out. They didn't find out until they were told by 2 federal inspectors who come once a year, who just happened to learn about this. And as they started asking questions about it, they found out that her record keeping was horrible. She wrote down monkeys' numbers that were used in one way. It turns out the monkeys weren't even in her protocol. They were supposed to, there were all sorts of things they were supposed to do. It was just a mess. So the claim was that this is proof that the oversight works. It was going on for 17 years. Now, I thought, well, maybe, I went back and looked at all of her papers, all of A. Terasawa's papers. What I did is I went to PubMed. I wrote in Terasawa and, capital A-N-D, using the Boolean logic, push-pull, push-pull. And I got back 26 papers. I looked at the abstracts of all 26 of those papers. And in every one of those papers, she says, I'm using a push-pull perfusion method. She explained in every one of those papers what she was doing. Now, Sangren said, I thought this was sort of interesting. He said, This is his quote in the Capital Times, August 16th, 2005. Evidence, he said that Tarasawa's subsequent suspension was evidence of the process of oversight working. We investigated, we determined a particular procedure was too risky and could no longer be performed at all. So it took them 17 years to decide that the procedure was too risky. And that's what they said was evidence of the oversight system working. I don't think it does work. And I think this is a case in point. It's just a mess. It's just a mess. We were recently told that to find out about individual monkeys on campus, we sometimes ask for documents. We ask for the serial numbers of the monkeys. Then individuals will write to the university and say, I'd like the health information for monkey R29082 so that we can get those records back and find out what actually happens to the individual animals. I think some of you may have picked up out on the thing, one monkey's life. That's an example of the sorts of information that we can find out. There's more on our website that you can see. We were just recently told by the university that they'll no longer give out that information. They won't give you information on a specific monkey. Now, there's no person's name associated with that. It's just, what did the monkey live through? They don't want you to know what's going on. It's very, very hidden. We're not allowed to hear discussions during the public meetings about what's being planned to be done to the animals in the labs. They ask you to leave the meetings. You can hear the very first part when there's they talk just it's administrative nonsense. And then when they start to talk about what it is they're going to do to the animals, the public has to leave the room. They don't want you to know. So, you know, what it looks to me like, here's the claim. Remember, we're curing important human diseases. Well, Basso didn't even know how they discovered L-DOPA, one of the main drugs for use in Parkinson's disease. When they made the claim that they've discovered the cause for diseases like PCOS, it's just a lie. Or they don't know, and they're just making shit up. And then they say that the oversight is so careful. We review everything. We know everything that's going on campus, and we're very careful about it. And it turns out it goes on for these things 17 years until, you know, the reason that they had to react because the USDA, if you don't react, they'll fine you. They'll give you a ticket. And they're never very large, but it's an embarrassment. It's a public embarrassment. And of course, the university didn't say anything about this. We found out through a Freedom of Information Act. We got the documents and we made them public. As soon as we made them public, they're like, oh, this proves the system is working. 17 years this went on. So that's one we discovered only accidentally. What else is going on? These studies that have been going on for so long that nobody pays any attention to. Or they say they're very well monitored. We're really carefully watching what's going on. We have all these highly trained people that are every day watching this stuff. And yet here's this woman who's a senior researcher, who's been doing her work for 17 years, publishing paper after paper after paper on what they're doing. And they're like, oh, we've just decided that it was too risky. What kind of nonsense is that? Anyway, we actually do have now a formal presentation of somebody who's actually thought about what they're going to say ahead. She's going to talk to you about Christopher Coe. His name is Dawn Kubly. We'll be here afterwards and be happy to talk to you, answer questions. It's hard to know. There's so much going on. It's hard to know just what to tell you to make you get angry. But anyway, we'll be around and answer all the questions you want. Dawn, are you ready? All right.
Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for your interest in the experiments going on at the UW with monkeys. As Rick said, my name is Dawn Kubly. I'm in the healthcare industry myself. I work at a hospital. I'm a physical therapist. human cadavers, those are dead bodies, humans. We also studied living humans that had trouble moving their bodies to the fullest. That was real critical in all of our learning. We studied humans. We didn't study dogs. We didn't study the bodies of guinea pigs. We didn't study the bodies of monkeys. We studied humans. My life took a curious turn about a year and a half ago when I learned about the atrocities in the animal laboratories. It was quite appalling for me to read about it and to watch hidden videos. I've made a friend of mine that's here watch one that she wanted me to turn off. And it was mainly physical kinds of pain. It was doing experiments without anesthesia. It was doing experiments and then not giving pain medication after the experiment. It was electric shocks. It was sewing eyes shut to study blindness. Really nasty things. But there's an even darker side. And in preparation for this evening's lecture, I learned a lot about the things they do to monkeys to cause a different kind of pain, and that's depression, isolation, and just general psychological devastation. This darker side is happening at the UW. It's happening at the Harlow Primate Lab. Rick talked a little bit about Harry Harlow. I'd like to share a few more things about Dr. Harlow and some things that went on at the Harlow Lab many, many years ago. And I'd like you to decide how fair you think this is. The Harlow Lab is named after Dr. Harry Harlow. He took baby monkeys away from their mothers months after they were, hours after they were born. So they never felt the warmth and hug of their mother. The infants then had surrogate mothers made of cloth or wire, and they were inanimate. They were just objects. Further studies isolated the monkeys more, and the infants were found crouched. They were rocking behavior, crying out for their mothers. And perhaps the most torturous thing that Harlow did, amongst other things, was putting monkeys in what he called the well of despair. This was a cone-shaped apparatus. It was about this big, upside-down cone. And after a couple days of scrambling to try to reach the top unsuccessfully, the monkeys gave up and were found just huddled in the bottom of the cone to live out the remainder of their 30 to 45 days in that cone apparatus. The third picture shown research titled Physiological Consequences of Maternal Separation and Loss in School Monkeys. So we were still taking baby monkeys from their mothers. What Cole was studying in the late 70s and early 80s was he was measuring cortisol levels. That's our stress hormones. After being taken away from their mothers. That was his research project. Now, to give Cole some credit, he stated, quote, "For humane and practical reasons, separation experiments were not initiated until the infants were at least 3 months of age," end quote. I feel better, do you? His research had, that I just described, measuring the cortisol levels, had startling results. The stress hormones did indeed increase during the times after the time that the babies were taken away from their mothers. But the stress levels were also elevated, but less so when the babies were able to stay in a familiar environment, meaning the mother left the cage, the baby was able to stay in a familiar cage, or that the mother was close by, meaning the baby could recognize his mother's voice in the room or maybe see the mother across the room in another cage. Startling data. You decide. Then Cole did some additional research on repeated separations. Let's not just do 1 time or 2 times, let's do repeated and let's see what happens. And then Cole finally decided to study what effect maternal loss would have on the monkey's immune system. Now Cole states, and I'll quote again, "Now the idea that stress can affect the immune system is not a new idea," end quote. There have been hundreds and thousands of studies done on immune system changes due to stress. This is very elementary. The data shows that when humans have stress of loss of a parent, loss of a child, a divorce, loss of your spouse, it affects your immune system. People get sick. We know this. We've got lots and lots of data. And this is on human beings. So what are we trying to do? Are we trying to validate the human studies by now doing animal studies? I don't know. I don't get it. So we're creating depression and loneliness in these monkeys to see if that wreaks havoc with their immune systems. So Cole's interest in the immune system brings us to his current study, which is kind of an oxymoron because it's in its 19th year of federal funding. And it's titled Prenatal Stress and Immune Responsiveness. This is his current study that's been going on for 19 years. There's a federal database that indicates the amount of funding researchers get. But I was only able to go back to 1992 on the computer, so we only have about the last 13 years. But in that 13 of the 19 years, he's been granted $4 million from the federal government. It's a lot of money. What I find curious about this kind of work on monkeys is that it's documented that monkeys are already stressed in the lab. They're in small cages. They're away from flying from the tree tops that Rick was talking about. They're isolated. They have frequent blood draws. People are coming at them with big padded gloves and grabbing an arm or a leg and jabbing them with the needle to get blood draws. They have constant diarrhea and other things. It's not a natural setting. They're already stressed. And this is documented. So now you're taking a monkey that's already stressed and has a compromised immune system because of that stress, and we're going to further stress them to see what happens with their immune system. So what has Christopher Cole been doing in this 19-year study and counting? Well, he's investigating whether exposing a pregnant monkey with her fetus to repeated episodes of stress, how that would impact their offspring. once the monkey initially becomes pregnant, they're transferred to a room where she is undisturbed for the 24-week pregnancy. Except for this 6-week startle protocol, which I'll tell you about. So can you imagine being pregnant, which is a very emotional and nurturing time, and you're isolated, undisturbed, as the protocol says. So at some point during this 24-week pregnancy, for 6 weeks, you're then put in a small transport cage. So now you've left your really large home to a small transport cage and taken into a dark room. What I'd like you all to do is close your eyes, and you're in this dark room, in this small cage. This is one of 3 acoustical startles that this monkey hears over the next 10 minutes. And this is done every day for 6 weeks during the 24-week pregnancy. After the babies are born and they reach 2 years of age, Cole selected 20 monkeys to be in this project. And they drew blood from the monkeys in an undisturbed setting, they called it, and then they drew blood again when they separated the monkey from their cage mate, or what one might say their only friend, because now they're caged with one other monkey. Final analysis, pay attention now. There was a decrease in the number of lymphocytes, that's our fighting cells against disease. There was a decrease in the monkeys that were born from mothers that had the startle protocol. So what does all this mean? We're supposed to tell pregnant mothers not to drive a car? Gosh, you hate to be on the 12 and 18 belt line and get a horn blown at you. We're supposed to tell pregnant mothers not to work. Are we supposed to keep pregnant mothers in an undisturbed room for 9 months so that they don't have any stress in their lives? I don't know. But due to my potential bias, because I think it's suffering to the animals, and I don't see the human connection, I decided to ask some practicing physicians to enlighten me. They must know about this cutting-edge work happening right here at the UW Madison, been going on for 19 years. I first talked to a practicing gynecologist who cares for mothers-to-be. And I said, what do you tell your patients? I didn't tell her why I was asking. What do you tell your pregnant mothers? She says, nutrition is critical. That's the most important thing I tell them. Eat well. Followed by, get plenty of rest, exercise, avoid smoking, avoid drinking. She knew nothing about not driving on the belt line, not involved in stressful activity. But she said, why don't you talk to a pediatrician? They're the ones that work with the little people. So I talked to a pediatrician, and I said, why do you suppose this, when you see sick kids, why is that? And the pediatrician, practicing pediatrician, respected pediatrician in this field, said, when I see sick kids, it's primarily kids that are at daycare. There is a plethora of germs that the kids bring and share. Those are the kids I've seen. He says the other kind of kid that I see that's sick a lot is a lot of mothers that were brought up in poor settings. They often don't have good nutrition, may have smoked, may have drank. He said stressed mothers often don't eat well, often smoke, often drink, don't get exercise, don't sleep enough. He was also unaware of this cutting-edge research at the UW, Madison. Didn't know the connection between psychological stress during pregnancy and outcomes that Cole has talked about with his monkeys. So these are experts in the field. I'd like to share a quote from Dr. Ray Greek. He's an anesthesiologist. He actually taught here at the UW in the 80s. He was a professor. No number of animal studies is going to improve the way individual mothers care for themselves and their gestating babies. This is entirely a case of preventive health. Wouldn't this $4 million by this one researcher be better spent towards education and outreach? With people, prevention is powerful. That's documented too, very well documented in human situations. This preventative medicine is the big buzzword today. It would eventually take the burden off of our healthcare system, preventative health, if people took greater responsibility for their health. The other thing is, Cole studies stress. Stress is very multifactorial, meaning that there's a variety of elements that affect it. The lab simply can't duplicate this. The animal lab can't duplicate this. There are thousands of real-life world events, stressful, happening every day, every minute. And it's different from one person to the next. How I might react on the belt line in a traffic jam might be very different to how my husband would react to the same traffic jam. How do you research that in lab? We know that stress compromises the immune system. Talk to a cardiologist and they'll tell you what stress does to the heart. Talk to a gerontologist who works with the elderly, and they will tell you what the stress of aging does to the immune system of the elderly people. That's why elderly people get flu shots. Talk to pharmacists who dispense drugs, of which 25% of all the drugs dispensed in the United States today is either a tranquilizer, an antidepressant, or an anti-anxiety drug. We got plenty of stressed people in the world to study if we need to. The U.S. Public Health Service has made reducing stress one of its major health promotion goals. And as you know, the survivors of the Hurricane Katrina have certainly had their immune systems compromised. I'll bet if Cole took blood draws of those folks, their cortisol levels would be up, their stress hormone, and I'll bet their immune response would be compromised. That's just kind of basic. To learn about people and human disease, we have to study humans. Human DNA, human tissue, human genetics, epidemiology, that's what's going on in the real world. There's a study going on at the Iowa University in their cardiac unit. They're studying people who've had heart attacks, and they're teaching them how to meditate. And they're finding that those people's heart rates decreased, their blood pressures decreased, their stress is reduced. That's real live research going on with real live people trying to find some things that people can do to reduce their stress and better their health. Studying animals in the lab is it's an unnatural setting. It's a poor indicator of translating to human benefit. In fact, it's miserably poor. The cost of the taxpayer is too high. The cost to the animals is too high. And the application to humans is very limited. So I'll leave you with this final quote. Could you read that on your own? Thank you for your time.
hearing is that monkeys think and feel much like humans do. But we don't treat them like humans. We subject them to pretty brutal and sometimes fatal experiments. We pay for them with our money. We wonder what benefits we get for it. 19 years of scaring target monkeys with car horns. What's the benefit? $4 million and all that suffering in monkeys. I want to tell you some other things that make me mad. As Rick pointed out early on, the university makes it difficult to find out what's really going on in the labs. I'll give you a whole bunch of examples for that. I'll give you just 3. As he mentioned, you used to be able to go to oversight committee meetings and hear discussion of proposed experiments in the labs. In August 2003, the university decided not to do that anymore, not to discuss proposed experiments where the public is allowed to attend. They've defended that secrecy since then by citing exceptions to the state's open meetings law. And depending on the context in which they're citing the exceptions, they're either citing exceptions that literally don't exist. Literally don't exist. If you look at an April guest column from last spring in the Wisconsin State Journal and see what the head of the all-campus ICAC oversight committee said, and try to look up the exceptions in the state's open meetings law to see how he's defending that secrecy, you won't find them. In other contexts, they cite the specific sections of the statute that they're invoking to defend their secrecy. And when you look those up, you can't figure out how it applies to a university setting, why these committees should be able to invoke those exceptions. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's what they were doing for 2 years, and the Alliance for Animals filed a complaint with the district attorney under the state's open meetings law because we thought these were clear violations. Guess what the university's response is? After 2 years of using the open meetings law to defend their secrecy, now they say the open meetings law doesn't apply to these committee meetings. Doesn't even apply. So which is it? It sounds like a slippery, questionable legal defense to me. Second example. 3 years ago, there was a veterinarian at the Primate Center who complained about the treatment of the animals. She was very concerned about the treatment of the animals in the Primate Center. She was fired. I can't say it was cause effect. I don't know what happened. She complained. She was fired. She complained internally. As far as I know, she didn't go public. She sued the university for wrongful termination, and they settled out of court. The university paid her $260,000. Now, as a condition of the out-of-court settlement, and this is quite common, this isn't a unique case, but as a condition of the out-of-court settlement, she's not allowed to discuss what she saw in the labs anymore. Now, as I say, that's pretty common in out-of-court settlements, so maybe we shouldn't make a big deal of it, but the result is the same. An insider who was concerned about the welfare of the animals and saw some things that disturbed her, even as a veterinarian, who was used to this stuff, was paid $260,000, and now she can no longer talk about what she saw. Third example. In the last 18 months, the university has declined 3 times to debate us on the topic of animal research in public, or to participate in any other kind of public information event. We have some contact, some communication with a high-ranking member of the oversight committee. And he told us one day that the university thinks that if the public knew more about the research that was going on, they'd be more supportive of the research. So he was in favor of sharing more information with the public. We said, great. We're in favor of sharing more information with the public because we think the effect's going to be just the opposite. So why don't we get together and we'll co-host some public information event. We can each present our points of view, share some information with the public, and let's let the public decide. Let's just let them know what's going on in the labs and let them decide how they feel about it. Never happened. Apparently they're not interested in doing it. Another thing that makes me mad is the university uses what you call perhaps unsavory public relations tactics to misrepresent us and our views, and to deceive the public. A couple months ago, the public information officer at the Primate Center, full-time PR person, wish that we could afford one, wrote an email message to the Dane County Board of Supervisors and the Dane County Executive. And in it she said all kinds of interesting things that I want to share with you and respond to. And because the university won't come up and talk in public like this with us, I'm going to have to represent both sides. So over here, I'm going to be the public information officer for the Primate Center, and over there I'm going to be somebody who cares about monkeys. Characterizing animal rights activists, she said, most of those people are merely those who say send money to PETA and other animal rights groups without knowing that they may be supporting domestic terrorism. A terrorism right now after 9/11 is kind of like a 1950s McCarthyist buzzword, right? That's how you paint all your enemies, the terrorists. She says, I would think you would want to represent the people in your districts fairly and think about the animal rights community, think about what the animal rights community really does, the violence it encourages. She goes on to make a whole bunch of insinuations and false allegations about one of our members and something that happened in 1999, and it's false. The Primate Center officially distributed a link, I believe on a website and both on an email distribution list. They distributed a link to a blog that a DJ had written, rabidly attacking one of our members. It was clearly a personal attack. The Primate Center distributed it through their official communications channels. Does everybody know what an ad hominem attack is? An ad hominem argument? Paul?
It's attacking the person rather
Attacking
than
the
the
person.
issue.
In a debate, if you don't have a strong argument based on the issues, you resort to attacking your opponent personally. It's called ad hominem. It's a Latin phrase meaning at the person or against the person. This is an ad hominem attack because the university can't come up in public and talk openly about what's going on with us. So they attack us personally, and they use the 2005 equivalent of McCarthy as communism or terrorists. Well, let me tell you how much how true that is. There hasn't been any property damage, any violence, any intimidation of researchers at the University of Wisconsin in Madison since 1999. Nobody I know was involved in what happened in 1999. Nobody in our group is interested in property damage, violence, intimidation. We get together, we talk about our strategies and tactics, and we say, animal rights groups do this other stuff. Do we want to do them? No, we don't. We are not a violent group. We don't even want to discuss that stuff. We work for an organization that has a written statement of nonviolence, and we take it seriously. We're simply not interested in violence. But violence is a big differentiator between the researchers and us. You know what it is? It's the violence they're perpetrating in the labs. It's the kind of stuff you heard about tonight with Chris Clo's experiments. It's not outside the labs. It's not with the animal rights activists. All the violence is in the labs. All the violence is in the labs. The university likes to talk, as Rick mentioned, about the benefits that we're getting from this research and how it's helping humans. And we'll often cite in vague terms HIV-related research and Parkinson's-related research. I can't tell you unequivocally that there's never any benefit. I don't know. I haven't looked at everything. But I can tell you firsthand one thing that I experienced. In July, we made a presentation. We've been doing this 3 months so far. July was our first one. In July, we talked about one researcher. And after the presentation, she herself got up in front of the room and she made a statement. Made it quickly, then left, didn't take any questions. But she made a statement briefly, and she connected her research to Parkinson's with the implication that her research is helping or is going to help Parkinson's patients. Here's her research. Now you decide. She drills a hole in the skulls of monkeys. She inserts 80 microelectrodes into neurons in the brain. She restrains the monkey in a chair, puts a screen full of lights in front of them, causes them to make eye movements following lights on the screen, then observes which neurons are active in their brains as they're following the lights on the screen. Then, as far as we can tell, not certain, but we believe that the monkeys are killed and then their brain tissues are examined after the study. Benefits to Parkinson's patients? I have trouble even imagining it. In the last 4 years, you and I have paid this researcher $1.2 million to conduct studies like that. And other researchers around the country, perhaps tens of millions of dollars for similar studies. There may eventually be some benefits of this kind of work, but for now in the foreseeable future, it's basic science. It's just basic science. It's not applied science. It's not applied research. It's basic science done at a pretty gross level. By which I mean, she's not doing too much more than identifying a connection between a neuron and a muscle. A neuron and a muscle. And it's really not much more sophisticated than saying the shin bone's connected to the knee bone. That's all it is. There's a physical connection in the brain. The university likes to say that, the experiments aren't that bad. The animal rights activists exaggerate. The public information officer apparently doesn't like us describing surgical techniques that sound rather graphic, but are actually common to both people and animals. And we heard this from the researcher in July also, who got in from the room. What we're doing to monkeys and stuff, we do to people also. It's not that big a deal. 3 months of these presentations, I'm going to go through quickly what we've learned so far about actual studies in the primate sense. And let's see if any of these techniques sound like they're used in human beings, okay? One researcher causes gross deformities in female monkeys by injecting them as their fetuses with large doses of testosterone, male hormones, to the point that their vaginal openings close up and they are effectively androgynous. They have no gender. Do we do this to people? Another researcher burns the emotional center, the amygdala, in a monkey's brain, damaging up to 75% of it, thoroughly burning it with acid, and then observes how well the monkeys sleep with the damaged or destroyed amygdala. Do we do this to people? Then there's the one I already talked about, the hole in the skull, the electrodes in the brain, the eye movements, connecting the neurons to the muscles. Kill the monkey, examine the tissue, we think there's some evidence of